Дорогие гости вебинара, приветствую вас на
Dear visitors, dear audience of our webinar, greetings at our seventh final webinar that we, as an environmental group who is monitoring the consequences of war on the environment, Ukrainian War Environment Consequences Work Group, that we do together with Svea Foundation. This is the seventh and final webinar in our cycle. And today we are going to discuss on how to write about environmental consequences of war in Ukraine. We have two great speakers to tell us about that. Victoria Hubareva, Ukrainian environmental journalist, author of different journals, Green European Journal, NASA, the author of Biosphere Reserves of Ukraine, and other publications. Victoria is going to tell you how she works in the field, what challenges are there for the journalists during the wartime. She will tell you how you can collect the information, gather the information, and verify it in the conditions of war. Another speaker is Alexey Ovchinnikov, participant of the Green Network, chief editor-in-chief of the UWEC. He will tell you how to look for information, how to verify it, and maybe he will highlight some of the topics that went under the radar. Maybe they weren't highlighted sufficiently in the work of Ukrainian and international journalists who were.
вступительная часть у нас.
I think that this is it with the introduction, and I would like to invite our first speaker, Alexey Ovchinnikov. The floor is yours, Alexey. He will tell us how to collect information, how to verify it, what sources should or should not be trusted, and he will try to draw our attention to some new topics that could have been overlooked by the international journalistic community. Good evening, everybody. My name is Alexey Ovchinnikov. I'm an environmental activist, journalist, scientist, and researcher, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the UWEC, and I work in the Belarusian organization in exile, which works also in the Belarusian regions. So in the Belarus, the organization was liquidated, and many eco-activists and journalists left Belarus. I used to live in Ukraine for quite some time, and for me, the issue of the full-scale invasion was very important. I would like to tell you a few words how I started working on this topic. In the first day of the war, I started documenting the chronicles of the environmental consequences of war, the things happening directly on the front line. It was very important because Ukrainian mass media did not have this possibility to record the relevant data. So me and some other journalists started doing this. And in May, we had an idea to create the UWEC Work Group in April and May. So this is a working group, and its aim is to analyze environmental consequences. So in June, we had published the first articles on the website. Since that time, we had 18 issues, and each containing 6 to 7 articles discovering different environmental aspects and consequences of the war. If we discuss the topics that are very important for research for the UWEC Work Group, when we started the analysis, we tried to focus on the consequences of big importance for the region. It was very important to highlight what was happening in Ukraine. This was the period of urgent hot news in Ukraine. Every time we were receiving different pieces of news about shelling of oil bases, on the capturing of reserve territories, on how the war had an impact on the infrastructure of the country, its nature and environment. And also, from the start, we set ourselves the task to work on those topics that are relevant for the entire region. So this is a brief information on how, so this is the link to our website of the UWEC Work Group. We have more than 90 articles that have been published. We also conducted a number of webinars that you have visited. And these are the topics that we were covering. Of course, it was very important to see how the war was affected the protected areas, because the reserve zones, the reserve areas suffer a lot from the full-scale invasion. We know that one of the largest reserves in Ukraine, Askania Nova, has been occupied. Another topic that we were raising is militarization of border areas, which is often overlooked in other mass media. For example, for Belarus, we were highlighting the impact of war on the Polessia. It was militarized even before the full-scale invasion, and we were conducting a number of research to study how the military trainings could impact the Polessia territory, which depends a lot on the climate change. Also, we were conducting the OSINT analysis. This is what we were doing a lot in the first year. In the first year and a half, we were collecting materials from the Telegram channels and different open groups to study how the war is impacting the nature and environment. And fortunately, we had relevant experts who could conduct the field research. Of course, we could start the field research in the end of 2022 and in 2023. These were the deoccupied territories of Kiev region where we could start to collect the data. Right now, of course, if we speak about the field research to see how the war is impacting of the region in Ukraine, this kind of research is impossible in Ukraine, in Belarus and Russia and other nearby countries. Why? Because the border areas have been militarized and they are in the special attention of the armed forces. Another topic that we quickly uptook is destruction of artificial water reserves. So one of the first articles was dedicated to the Oskil water reserve and destruction of the dam. And the question was whether it was relevant to reconstruct the water reserve as it used to be earlier. Then we were analyzing the impact of the destruction of the dam in the Irpen when the Russian forces were stopped on their way to Kiev. And also, of course, the destruction of the Kakhovka dam near the Kakhovka power station, which drew the attention of the global community. And then we started to speak more actively about the ecocide issue. This was one of the most relevant topics there. So when people write about the situation around the Kakhovka water reserve, and if we do this, we are asking a question whether it is relevant to rebuild the Kakhovka reservoir and to restore the Kakhovka hydropower plant. And the ecologists and environmentalists say that this is not necessary from the point of energy, from the electrical power point, and from the point of preserving the biodiversity as well. Another topic that is gaining momentum right now is the green recovery of Ukraine. It was clear back in 2022 and in 2023, and during this year, it is clear that the largest damage done to the nature may be related to the recovery of Ukraine, because recovery of the infrastructure means rebuilding the cities, which means looking for the resources, mining those resources very often from the subsoil of Ukraine. And this is a very important topic. It is necessary to pay attention to it, to write about it and discuss it. Also, it is necessary to mention that the war has a cross-border, transboundary nature. The warfare is conducted not only in Ukraine. The gas pipeline was damaged in the Baltic Sea, and it also has a big environmental impact. There were a lot of pollutants And there is a very important impact of war needs additional attention, and we can understand the consequences only in the nearest years. So if we are analyzing the environmental impact, we can say that the time of quick news has passed, and we can start a deeper analysis. From the point of view of journalism, I can say that first of all, we have a demand on the investigative journalists and the journalism of solutions. Indeed, right now they have certain data that they can use for certain projects and research. And another topic which is often overlooked, this is the crisis between international environmental and climate policy. Right now, the Paris Treaty is under a big question mark, and implementation of the COP policies, because many international programs are being destroyed. They cannot work because people are not able to reach common language. This is very relevant for the Arctic programs. We are going to cover this topic on our website, and this is an important and interesting topic for coverage. We have gathered a number of resources that can be useful for the journalists. On our website, we have a separate section with a list of resources. Here you can find links to different research groups, Ukrainian non-government organizations, international think tanks that work on the analysis of environmental consequences. And if you monitor those resources through social networks or through their websites, this will help you to stay in the know. You can use them. This is an open tool that you can use as you think fit. Probably one of the main sources of information of the environmental consequences of different conflicts is the COPS Conflict and Environmental Observatory. They have been working in different conflicts for quite a long time. They work not only in Ukraine, but also in Africa and in Latin America. They also work right now in the Middle East. But it is worth noting that they have not abandoned the question of Ukraine, and together with the Environment Network, they are issuing some publications. There were 7 of them, and they discuss different peculiarities of environmental consequences of work in Ukraine, impact on the environment. The last issue was dedicated to the reserve territories. The previous issue was dedicated to the sea ecosystems. Another issue was dedicated to the impact of different power generation centers when there were strikes on the energy infrastructure. They were trying to understand the nature of pollution and the consequences. We also work with Ukrainian NGOs. One of them, ecologically oriented, probably one of the strongest and the most well-known is the Eco Action. They are doing a lot of things. They are getting engaged into the green recovery. They were working on just transition, oriented on transition of the carbon-oriented economy to greener types of infrastructure. Right now, it is very important to understand how Ukraine plans its recovery. There is an ongoing discussion that this recovery has to be green. It has to be oriented on the Green Deal, because in my personal opinion,
because I think in such a way we will follow the Clean Deal policy and in general the green policy of the EU. Eco Action uses one of the instruments for fixation and documenting the ecological crimes. They have a special map for that. And one more thing, it's an embargo on the natural fuels, because at the beginning of the war, the Ukrainian NGOs We are trying to support the idea of the embargo for the fuel. Unfortunately, it was not reflected in the policies of the whole world, but Europe started to use more alternative energy sources, and the policy changed. And they are now, many European countries are trying to use more and more green energy sources. Of course, we also need to mention another nature conservation group, Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group, it's called. UNCG. We are working with this group actively, and the protection of nature and how we protect this nature is very important. Because it is one of the important integral parts of the policy. Many natural preserves are now suffering a lot from the war. Some of them are even occupied, some of them can't receive any tourists, and some don't have enough financing, not enough funds. Also, the experts of Ukrainian nature conservation groups help us to make the analysis of ecosystems, and it will help us to recover Ukraine and Ukrainian ecosystems after the war is finished. When we look at the maps and at the territories along the front line, we can see that along the front line there are many plants growing, wild plants, weeds, etc. At the same time, there are many invasive plants growing there, and they are negatively influencing the biodiversity of our territories, and it is also changing in a negative way the ecosystem of Ukraine, and it influences the way how the nature will recover later. So we need to take this fact into account, and the territories, of course, many territories are mined at the moment, but nonetheless, due to the satellite analysis, we can at least make some drafts on how we will recover this territory later. And during the First World War, for example, it was not possible to make such satellite photos. Of course, we cooperate with many Ukrainian and not only Ukrainian NGOs. We are working with Rubrika. It's another instrument that helps us to document the crimes against nature. What I should say about Ukrainian NGOs is that they are really scrupulously documenting all the crimes against nature. It will later help us to speak on international level about the ecocide topic. Ecocide is a very important topic. I'd like to draw your attention to it because it is not internationally recognized at the moment, and probably the war in Ukraine will help to change the whole policies regarding the ecological rights. And maybe they will start talking about it on international level. In such a way, we'll be able to protect nature on the whole planet better. I'd like to say that ecocide in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus is a crime, and for this crime, people can be punished in these countries. Russia was already discussing some cases on ecocide in the context of the water coming to Crimea. But unfortunately, this topic of ecocide was not developed and not looked at with enough attention. So it will be great if at some point we can move this topic to international level. I'd like to point out that a lot of information can be found in Twitter, in Facebook, in Telegram channels. Sometimes it is not easy, especially it was difficult to look for information in very hot periods of war, but nonetheless, we can find certain specialists. At one of our webinars, Bino Tönenburg was making speeches, and he's a very good specialist in satellite imagery analysis. And he collected a lot of information about various factories producing oil, etc. So he can be very informative. Twitter is also a very valuable resource, a resource one can use very actively. Also, at the moment, there are many webinars and virtual events, so one can follow the topics that are relevant for you. And one can visit those webinars, virtual online events. One can collect this information, and later I also recommend work with experts. Experts may help you to verify the information. Selecting experts will depend on their connections with some big respectable groups. For example, if expert is working with some known group, it makes the probability that it's a reliable expert higher. Sometimes it is difficult to escape the propaganda umbrella. Because of this war, there are many unreliable sources. So it is very important for many people to understand what is really happening and how the war is influencing ecosystems and how ecosystems can adapt to this war situation, how the situation in the regions may change as a result of this war. Therefore, the work of journalists today is of high importance. And especially investigative journalism is very important, plus satellite imagery. I also think that it is important to make an analysis on how we can organize recovery of Ukraine after the war is finished. Thank you so much. If there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you so much, Alexei. Really, I think you made a very interesting speech. You touched key topics of a big block of topics like the ecological influences of war and impacts of war. You mentioned the experts that were making speeches on similar webinars. And I think it was especially important that you mentioned the list of resources, because it's clear that not only our group is analyzing the impacts of war, because we have limited humans resources. At the same time, we are in contact with other organizations like Ukrainian NGOs, international NGOs. We are trying to have a table on our website where we mention all the important NGOs and where we mention the information, like where they work, what is their focus of work. As for verification of information, it's also a very important issue. Since several years already, the problems of misinformation and disinformation became especially vital for many people working with information. So it's important to understand where to find information, how to verify it. We actually discussed about this topic on one of our webinars. We also have some recordings of the previous meetings, all the presentations, and you will see that we already discussed this topic in some way. I'd like to give the floor to Victoria. She will speak about more practical things. She will speak how the journalist working with ecological topics is working in Ukraine. Now, I know that you are also writing articles, working with international mass media. Very often, international colleagues are asking us to give them contacts of experts. And Victoria, what can you tell us from your own experience? Thank you, Angelina. Thank you, Alexei, for very interesting speech. Alexei spoke more about online investigations and research, and I am normally doing that on field. So I'm working a lot on the field. As it was mentioned before, I was implementing various projects in ecological topics, environment protection topics. Besides it, I was documenting the crimes against environment which were made in Ukraine. Now I'm working on UNESCO project regarding the Biosphere reservoirs in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we have 9 of them. I already visited 5 of them. The others are either occupied or at the front line or they are closed. So I managed to visit 5. So I have enough experience and I can share some practical tips with you in case you want to work in Ukraine or if you're just interested in this information on how one can work in Ukraine on the field during the war times. I'd like to mention some important issues that you may need. First of all, accreditation at our Ukrainian armed forces. Next slide. Till recent times, this accreditation was not necessary. It was till middle of 2022. But after the right bank of Kherson was liberated, Ukrainian journalists came to that territory. And unfortunately, some journalists showed too much. They were filming many sensitive objects and they brought in danger many people living there. And after that, Ukrainian government decided to allow journalists, only those journalists who got accreditation from the Ukrainian armed forces. And it is not only about Ukrainian journalists, but also about the foreign journalists. That's why each needs accreditation. The documents that you need to collect, it's quite easy to collect them. You have the list of them on the screen. What you should not forget is that normally it takes 10 days to get accreditation. Some people are even waiting for 1 month till they get the accreditation. And normally the accreditation is valid for 6 months. Which complications it brought to the work of the journalists. Without this accreditation, now, and although it was said that this accreditation is necessary only for the journalists working on the front line, in reality, accreditation is needed also for journalists working on other territories. Sometimes it is used also in order to get some credit of respect to the journalist. Recently, I had a case when I had to make an interview with the director of the Black Sea preserve. And although the interview was conducted online, this territory is currently occupied, the territory of the reservoir. The director was on the liberated territory, but nonetheless, that director asked me to show him my accreditation so that he was sure that I'm a Ukrainian journalist working for the interests of Ukraine. That's why the press card is necessary for the journalists in any case.
Then what we have to face is limitation of photo and video recording. Recently, journalists have received a great opportunity to show some scale footage, and we would like to actively use it in the war. So, I mean, the video footage recorded from the drones This is how we can show the scale of shelling on the territories or fields, or the scale of fires that appeared as a result of shelling. But drone recordings are not allowed right now, and if a journalist tries to lift it in the air, it will be blocked or shut down, or the military personnel will block the signal and take the drone for themselves. So in order to make drone footage, you need to get permission from the regional military administration. And it's not guaranteed that you will get it. For example, we used to visit the Chernobyl area, and it is forbidden to make footage everywhere there. Also, we have for example, in Lviv region, we have the Yavoriv National Park near the Yavoriv National Shooting Range. So it was forbidden for us to use the drone because it was near a military object. So besides the permission from the regional administration, you need to get a permission from the police, and this is not it. It is forbidden to publish certain photographies or a certain video footage because they have to undergo through certain censorship. Usually, they warn you that you should avoid certain frames or certain footage. So, essentially, you should not record fortifications or military equipment or numbers of military equipment, plate numbers, or faces of the military. Also, it is not advised to film the borderline infrastructure in order to avoid the danger or risks of its destruction. So, when we visited the Carpathian Mountains, we were walking a lot near the border territories, and we were able to shoot brilliant footage, but we are not able to publish it because you can see the border on the photos and videos, or border or some signage and so on. So you can shoot or you can make footage only of those things that are safe. Yes. And other important things to take into account. In order to visit certain areas, you will need to fill certain forms. In my case, as an environmental journalist, I was visiting different biospheric reserves, and national parks. So, to visit every such territory, you need to make an official letter of request with a letterhead of your organization. Then you will need to be accredited with the armed forces of Ukraine. And another important point is that in your application, you need to justify, to explain why you need to visit this territory. So you can say that this is socially important, or why you have decided to write an article about this place, why you need to visit, why it is a place of interest for your audience. So this is a statutory requirement to these applications. It is necessary to remember this. This is a formality. You can write several sentences about that. I'm not even saying that you need to indicate your personal data, the data of your shooting team, and the name of the media outlet where you would like to publish your materials. So the photo is a great illustration of the environmental journalist's work in the conditions of war. Though it was made in the western Ukraine, practically on the border with Poland, anyway, we have a military personnel with us because this is a protected territory. And we had a funny story when our shooting group, together with a forest manager of the national park, we were trying to climb up the hill to get the location, but we were caught in the border guards photographic traps, and in several minutes the border guards came out of the bushes to check our passports, to see who we were, whether we were trying to pass the border illegally. But it was helpful because we agreed our visit with the Border Service of Ukraine. They already had our passport information. They checked us, that it was us, and the story ended well. So on the slide, when you will get the presentation, you will be able to see the contacts of the state border service, and there is also the contact information and focal points of the armed forces of Ukraine, where you can agree your visits, and also the state agency of Ukraine managing the exclusion zone, because this zone has a lot of nice scenery to make footage. So this is the Chernobyl exclusion zone. It was occupied in the first months of the war. And there are still some fortifications of the Russian army that they have built. Of course, they are not used by anyone. They are just standing there. But anyway, it is important to keep this in mind. And I wanted to note this in my presentation, that in order to visit the exclusion zone, you need a separate permission that you can get in the state agency for zone management. And we have the link in the presentation. Probably this is it for me, and you can ask me questions in the chat box. I think our moderator, Angelina, is going to transfer your questions to me. Thank you, Victoria. I believe that this is a great hands-on presentation with specific pieces of advice and tips for our colleagues who are trying to work on the ground to get, so that they need to get all the permission, or if they don't work in the field, they can catch a glimpse of the work of journalists in the field during the war. So this is your everyday work for you and for many other colleagues from Ukraine and international journalists. So in the audience, we have different journalists from different parts of the world, and this is very relevant and practical information that helps us understand where the information is coming from, where you can get it, who can see what permissions do you need. Thanks a lot. And I believe that this was a very useful presentation and report. So we have received several questions already. The first one, do you research the impact of the environmental situation in Ukraine during the war on the bordering countries, Belarus, Russia, Slovakia, Moldova, Hungary? Can this research help Ukraine to develop the strategy to resolve environmental problems and indirectly impact the ending of the war? Well, you can start, and I will add. Well, the question was not addressed to someone specifically. I can be the first. Literally yesterday, we had a forum in Kiev, United for Ukraine. It was participated by the environmental ministers of Romania and Moldova. And the research of the impact of war on different countries, this research are conducted inside those countries. And the environmental minister of Moldova noted that they have noticed changes of the quality of air in their country, and the Romanian environmental minister said that it seems in Dunai, in the Danube, they have already found some a certain type of wastes, and the Black Sea countries were actively monitoring the situation after the Kakhovka Dam destruction. They were following the situation, they were taking tests of the water in the Black Sea. Thank you, Victoria. Alexei. I would like to say that we need to distinguish the countries that have possibilities or opportunities for independent environmentalists and the countries who don't provide such an opportunity, and there is no open monitoring. If we talk about the entire region, there is a significant impact in the bordering areas of Belarus and Russia because they have become involved in the war, but it is important to conduct field research there. As for the Eastern Europe countries such as Slovakia and Poland, there they are doing monitoring efforts, but they have certain aspects that impact the situation in the country, such as militarization of the border areas, such as Lithuania and Latvia and other countries which are building the border fences. In Poland, we can see about the delimitation of the Belovesia area, and Lithuania, and in Latvia, these are certain wild areas on the border between Belarus and the Baltic states, which impacts on the natural reserve practices and the environment. Analyses are being done on the pollutions and their impact, and our analyses have shown that the impact on the environment cannot be limited only with Ukraine, because the nature does not know borders. So any military activities, any hostilities on the large territories, such as Ukraine, they have an impact on larger areas. And the bordering countries have to remember about that. And journalists have to take this into account. Thank you. The next question is not addressed to any of you in particular, so you can answer both. Can you refer to your group, to the UWEC Work Group, to verify data, in particular to verify photos? Probably I can answer. Well, if possible, I would like to show you the last slide of the presentation. So we have our editor's email and our social network address. You can ask us to verify photographies. We can advise you some experts who can help you if you're talking about satellite images. If we are talking about certain photos from the region, our experts can help, or we can advise you some other experts, depending on the photographs that you would like to verify. If this is about the reserve territories of Ukraine, our experts from the Ukrainian Environmental Group can help you to verify them. Or if we are talking about satellite images or regional images, we can advise you other experts. Thank you. Thank you, Alexei. So, next question. In your opinion, what topics or what aspects of the large area of environmental consequences of the war have not been fully covered, including in the international media? So what topics are not covered enough? So what topics you could advise to pay attention to? So I would advise you to pay attention to the topic of impact of war on the international environmental policy, because the impact is very strong and the topic is not very well covered. For example, how countries can reduce or change their climatic obligations as a consequences of the war. This is what regional journalists can pay attention to. If we are talking about journalists from Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia, you can look at the energy policy of different countries and impact of the war on the energy policy. I'm working with Climate Action Network, and they study the direct impact of the war on Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, where the atomic or nuclear lobby is gaining force and which has a negative impact on the environment in the countries. We can look at the impact of on the situation in the Caucasus, among other things, on the political level. These are the topics to pay attention.
So these are the topics I would pay attention to, and I should say that I haven't seen good analysis on the journalistic analysis of the scenarios about tragic events in Ukraine. for example, the work with the experts who are talking about some specific scenarios of recovery of our country would be very important, and we could use this information in various discussions. We already spoke about Kakhovka Dam. Ukrenergo is now making a decision to rebuild this dam, but at the same time, ecologists say that it is not necessary because coming back to old technologies of Soviet times is not good. Victoria. I would like to add, to my mind, it would be very useful that foreign journalists pay attention to how the environmental institutions are working in Ukraine. The heroism or the courage that they demonstrate and all the efforts that they are putting in order to monitor the situation and to fight the consequences, even being in occupation, they still using satellite images, information that is being sent from other territories, from the occupied territories. So they send this information, they analyze it, and then they tell it to the whole world. At the same time, these institutions are now not being funded. That's why if we speak about this, as a result, it can positively influence their recovery after the war is finished and how they will work now and continue doing their work in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you, Victoria. Dear colleagues, last question at the given time. Next question. You are working on the topics of environmental impacts of war since 2 years. What do you think? Since these 2 years, what were three main consequences that we should continue talking about?
Я начну, наверное,
Мгм.
тогда.
Давайте,
I
да.
will start, okay?
Да, если мы говорим о прецедентах,
If we speak about the cases from the real life, then of course the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam, it made the biggest impact because after this explosion there were many victims. I mean, people were killed and injured, ecosystem was damaged, many animals, flora, fauna was damaged. Also, fires. It is important to mention the fires. Very often, the forest fires, for example, can't be defeated on the occupied territories. And very often, I heard about it many times, that people in occupied territories, it's not so easy to put out fires. And if the forest fire happens, and then of course many ecosystems are being killed. Actually, this list can be very long and endless. That's why I will now give the floor to Alexei. Thank you so much, Alexei. The floor is yours. I totally agree that the terror on Kakhovka Dam is one of the loudest cases. One can also add here about Irpin and about other reservoirs. So artificial water reservoirs can be used in terroristic goals. And I would also like to add that for a long time, we were living under fear that there will be an explosion on Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Thanks God it didn't happen yet. But we have information that this plant was mined. So the firing in the territory of the power plant was very dangerous and kept us all under big pressure. For me, I'd like to point out that the occupation of Ascania Nova Protection Reservoir is also a very important issue. It's a very unique natural reservoir with very long history, and Ascania Nova was very often damaged by the policy of the previous governments. For example, in the 1930s, it happened as well, and it was damaged many times. The third point that I'd like to mention is climate problems and the relations between the ecological activists in various regions. At the moment, the situation is the following, that certain ecological activists have to look for new contacts and to work in a different environment. And in order to solve the ecological problems in their regions, sometimes it is necessary to make new contacts and new networking in the new situation. Victoria, would you like to add something, or should we move on? Yeah, we could move, but I'd like to add, I just remembered that I spoke about the Black Sea reservoir. When I spoke about the case with the director, it was the director of the national park, Berezhye Svetoslava. I wanted to mention this case because Chernomorsky Biospheric Natural Preserve is now occupied, and the administration of this preserve is a collaborator. He was installed by the occupational administration. Thank you, Victoria. One more question. Which scientific magazines could you recommend in order to analyze the ecological situation of Ukraine? UWEC Work Group? I agree. There run other magazines, COPS, for example. There are other publications in various bigger magazines. Very often we are cited in those magazines as well. So some of the examples of those magazines you will find the information about it. I will now post this information in the chat. And once again, we are open for providing help to journalists. In case you need some information, just write to us either in social media or just to our address. I recommend to sign up to our issues. We are going to publish soon issue number 19. In such a way, you will be able to follow the events and understand the ecological impacts better. Thank you so much, Alexei. Thank you, Victoria. I think that our webinar is about to be finished. Today we had our webinar number 7. And after that, we will make a small break in the series of our webinars. We conducted webinars from the middle of 2023. Since then, we had 7 webinars on various topics, topics like damage and destruction of Kakhovka Dam, and covering such topics as chemical contamination, usage of various weapons or verification of information, the ways of the work with satellite images, etc. You can, in general, learn more what are the environmental consequences of war All of this is located on our website. Today we were able to share our personal experience, give you some advice how one can work on field in Ukraine or from distance, for example, using the data from some scientific groups or satellite data, etc. Now I sent the link in order to be able to find more resources on the topic. I also mentioned our Telegram channel. You can freely join this channel. Also a link of a video recordings of our previous webinars. Continue our work. We are going to inform you about our future events in online format. We will continue publishing our articles, infographics, and other materials. If you have any questions, please write to us. We are always open to help you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our speakers, organizers, our technical support, our interpreters, and to all of those who helped us to organize these webinars, like people from the Green Foundation and other partner organizations. Of course, it is not easy for us to work with this very tragic topic because we are speaking about the ruinations and about the consequences, which are rather negative for the environment. But it's very important to document this information, to inform people all over the world. We do work in 3 languages, Ukrainian, Russian, and English. And we will continue documenting all the facts happening. Thank you so much for your participation, for your questions, for everything. And once again to Victoria and Alexei, thank to you as well. Have a lovely evening. And I hope the war will be finished soon. Thank you.
Спасибо всем.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.